Tonight, many in the migrant caravan heading toward the U.S. are resting in Mexico City. President Trump last tweeted about the caravan before Tuesday's elections, but the troops he deployed to the border are working right now to prepare for the caravan's arrival. Today, the government gave us a tour of the military base's temporary base in Donna, Texas, near the southern tip of Texas.
And our border reporter Oscar Margain shares what he saw firsthand.
It's been a busy week for the U.S. Army in South Texas as military vehicles carrying equipment and supplies pour into Camp Donna, a provisional base the military says is a life support area located next to the Donna border port of entry. After days of speculation about the military's role along the border, Northern Command invited the media on a guided government-organized tour to talk about the Army's day-to-day responsibilities.
When the soldiers come in, I give them a place to stay, I give them the food and the lodging, make sure they have medical treatment.
Camp Donna is a temporary base. There are now more than 600 soldiers, including Army engineers, technicians, and medics. So far, 2,800 have been deployed along the Texas border, 1,500 in Arizona, 1,300 in California, activated by the president in response to the possible arrival of migrants at least 600 miles away. The military describes the role as simply providing equipment and logistical support to Customs and Border Protection, a go-to phrase for everyone we spoke to at the camp.
All we're really doing is we're toughening and expanding on the protections of these port of entries.
But what does that really mean? The clearest example we found was 20 miles west at the Hidalgo port of entry, where soldiers, at the request of Customs and Border Protection, have been installing concertina wire all along and around the bridge and the riverbank.
Not really meant to keep from crossing, more of just creating a channel of where they can go and not go.
In the event that a migrant caravan does come here and migrants are desperately trying to reach the U.S. and CBP cannot handle that situation, how do you respond?
So that's not really our job, sir, to respond to the migrant caravan.
The lieutenant explains that a law known as the Posse Comitatus Act limits the Army's role and cannot act as immigration agents. However, it does provide exceptions to the rule in the case of an invasion, which is how President Trump has labeled the caravan. But military leaders stand firm that the response is solely to support CBP. In Hidalgo on the Texas-Mexico border, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.